Good morning, everyone. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Rod Babers and CJ Vogel of On Texas Football. This is the Saturday Conversation. We break down the weekend's games, brought to you by our friends over at MyBookie. 10 years in business. Use promo code ONTexas when you go with MyBookie. Guys, a lot of games on tap. Most of the sexy ones are actually in the SEC. There's not much going on outside the conference, although we are going to talk about one which pits the two defending national title contenders in Michigan and Washington. There's just some interesting stuff going on there that we need to talk about. But let's start in the SEC, and let's do it there. Missouri and Texas A&M get us kicked off today at 11 a.m. The game is on ABC. According to MyBookie, A&M favored in this game at by 2.5. I will add this. Missouri's ranked number 9 in the country. A&M ranked 25. Yet the odds makers are saying the Aggies are the favorites. You guys have any thoughts on this game? Missouri has been, how do I put it? They've been unimpressive at times this year. The Aggies seem to be on a little bit of a roll right now, right? They won 4 in a row, getting things going. What do you guys think about this game? It'll be broadcast, by the way, at 11 a.m. on ABC.
This is a big test for Missouri. They've, quote-unquote, been tested previously with Boston College, top 25 team at the time. Vanderbilt took them to overtime, but neither of those games kind of stood up to what we expected from Missouri coming into the season, right? They were top 10 in the country. They had a veteran quarterback. They have a wide receiving group that you could probably argue rivals just about anybody in the country coming into the season. Yet they've kind of squandered in these big moments, right? It wasn't pretty towards the back end of that second half against Boston College. I mentioned overtime against Vanderbilt. I know that they have a number 9 by their name. They're coming in again as a top 10 team, but listen, this is basically a do or die, a contender-pretender game for Missouri. If you lose this game, why am I to believe that you're going to be taken seriously moving on the rest of the year? However, if you win this game, okay, now you're a little bit more battle-tested. I'm back in, putting my chips in Missouri, maybe believing that they're a little bit more serious than what we kind of anticipated coming into this weekend. But it's a big game for them. And on the flip side, A&M, quarterback situation, you're playing another top team at home. Let's see how legit you will be moving forward as well.
Yeah, my disappointment in Missouri is that offense is not as high octane as we all predicted, right? It seems like the offense has regressed, even though they brought all the weapons and most of the weapons back on offense. It seems like they've regressed a little bit. If this was that Missouri offense from last year, honestly, I'd pick them going away to beat the Aggies, but it's not. And the Aggies actually have struggled a little bit in pass defense early on this year. Big question is quarterback for the Aggies. Everybody assumes it's going to be Marcel Reed, and he is not necessarily an accurate pocket passing quarterback, but he's a playmaker back there. Actually, I think he's top 10 in rushing yards for quarterbacks since he became the starting quarterback for them, and they're winning, and they're just winning ugly. So I feel like right now Missouri they got to show me. All right, no, but they got to show me. From the show me state, I need them to show me. They blew out who they play early on. Was it Murray State and Buffalo? Shut them out, as a matter of fact. And then the Boston College and Vanderbilt games, a little bit tighter. So maybe there's, as TJ said, maybe Boston College and Vanderbilt are a little bit underrated because Vanderbilt's better than we thought. I'm not sure what to think of Missouri because the offense has not really found its groove yet. So I think that's the real question mark with them. I think I'm leaning Missouri in the game, but it's their first test on the road. They played all their games at home too, so I don't know how they're going to respond to a road environment as well.
Brady Cook, the quarterback at Missouri, his experience is going to be leaned on in this game. A&M favored by 2.5. I'm going with the Aggies. I think they found something in Marcel Reed because the Aggie defense is good and can shut you down. The real problem with Missouri is they can't run the ball this year. They lost their running back. They lost a couple of offensive linemen. And their defense, and we mentioned this in the preseason, some of those Barry Odom recruits are finally cycling through. And these are all Eli Drinkwitz recruits. And Eli Drinkwitz not a defense-first guy like Barry Odom was at Missouri. And so that kind of is missing a missing ingredient. I want to say this. A&M wins this one, okay, if they beat Missouri today. A&M then plays Mississippi State. That's a win, okay? LSU versus Texas A&M in College Station then comes next on October 26th. They somehow get by there. They're going to be favored against South Carolina, New Mexico State, and Auburn, leading up to Texas. It could be Texas versus Texas A&M very easily if A&M gets by Missouri today and then gets by LSU for going to the SEC championship game. Very, very easy. I know. That game could have serious repercussions. I know they did not look good to start.
Right. I know. That's crazy.
That schedule lines up pretty well for the Aggies, in my opinion. I'm going with A&M. Which way are you guys going in this game, Missouri or A&M?
I'm leaning Missouri. I'm gonna take Missouri.
Okay.
I'm leaning A&M. I think that you can take away the Missouri run game. There's no Cody Schrager this year. Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, Nick Scowerton, that D-line with Torian York right behind them, kind of making Missouri one-dimensional. We talked about the wide receivers, but it's not been an offense that's clicked this week or this year. At home, I like A&M.
All right, before we go to the next game, in the next game, we're going to talk Tennessee, Arkansas. Arkansas is a upstart a little bit. Before we do that, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, MyBookie. With all the excitement of the season, make sure you're in the game with MyBookie. Bet any matchup, hundreds of college player props, and take advantage of weekly risk-free bets. The best part is you can do it all, anytime, anywhere, straight from your phone. Visit mybookie.ag and use promo code ONTEXAS to get started. It's MyBookie's 10th anniversary, and they're rolling out the red carpet for bettors. Bet big and bet confidently with risk-free Thursdays. If your boosted bet doesn't hit, you'll get your money back. Weekly no-sweat win-win bets all season long. And sign up now using my OnTexas code. That's OnTexas to cash in on a double deposit bonus. It's a no-brainer. Double the cash in your account before you even place your first bet. But do not wait on it because it's only available for a limited time. For those of you who've been already playing with MyBookie, they've got something for you as well. A brand new loyalty rewards program in MyBookie Plus. It's simple. The more you play, the more you earn. And as you progress through the tiers, unlock exclusive promotions, epic giveaways, and cash back in your account. All right, guys, we got a couple other games we want to talk about. Tennessee, Arkansas, chief among them. Almost every game in the SEC this week has some level of bearing on Texas. But Tennessee, Arkansas, the Longhorns are eventually going to have to go up to Fayetteville. Arkansas, not a great game last week. This game this week, number 4 Tennessee comes calling the Hogs in Fayetteville. Tennessee favored by 13.5. The game does not start until 6:30. Okay, it's on ABC primetime. I don't know when the last time Arkansas has had a primetime game on ABC. I mean, like 2005, something like that. I really, maybe Texas, 2004 with Vince Young and Cedric Benson. My point being, big game for Arkansas, but Tennessee, they've been a little bit of an immovable object on defense, really good, and their offense has had some firepower when they needed it. Got stumbled a little bit against OU, but what do y'all think about Tennessee, Arkansas?
Can I give you a Tennessee stat just to show you how dominant they've been?
Yes.
Tennessee has outgained its opponents by an average of 390 yards a game so far this season. There's 61 FBS teams who are not averaging 390 total yards a game.
God.
390 yards overall?
Like, that's how much they are outgaining their opponents by on average right now.
It's pretty significant.
What do you think that means for this game, Rod?
It's just a freaky stat that I wanted to share. But listen, I will say this about Arkansas. Arkansas has exceeded my expectation. Arkansas, listen, overtime. That was an overtime game they lost, so that could have easily been a win. They had a 4-point loss to the Aggies, so that could have been a win. You could be talking about Arkansas 5-0. A couple of plays had been a little bit different in those games. So I'm not gonna say it's a trap game for Tennessee, but they better be on their P's and Q's because they got a dynamic playmaker in Taylon Green, who I believe he's the only Power 4 quarterback to have at least 1,200 passing yards and 300 rushing yards. He can go, and he just goes off. Hell, man, he can be the great equalizer. I'll take Tennessee, of course, but I mean, I've been impressed actually with Arkansas and what they've done so far. That's a dangerous team. Arkansas and Kentucky now have taken on a different threat in my mind for Texas on this schedule than in preseason when I was thinking.
I think that's Rod. I think that's what I'm looking at in this game. How serious are the Razorbacks when Texas comes calling, right? And they got to keep their quarterback healthy, which Tennessee's going to bring a pass rush, by the way.
They got
if you're going to lose a quarterback, you might lose him against Tennessee. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. But Sam Pittman, to your point, Rod, he's making an all-out effort to keep his job.
Agreed.
They win this week, that would be absolutely huge. CJ, what do you think?
I think this is the most dynamic offense that Tennessee will play this year, and that's even having gone on the road to Norman and faced Oklahoma. Of course, we've talked about it. Oklahoma doesn't have a good offensive line. They don't have wide receivers. They made the switch in the middle of that game to go to the freshman quarterback, Michael Hawkins. I think you're going to be facing a little bit more of a challenging offense. And I say that because the running game of Jaquindon Jackson has been very good for Arkansas. The dynamic ability, the dual threat running passing ability of Taylon Green, that's a challenge for Tennessee. That's a challenge for anybody. And Rod, to your point, that's going to be a challenge for Texas down the road. I think Andrew Armstrong is one of the top wide receivers in the SEC as well. With that said, it should not be a game that Tennessee kind of falters in too much, right? Again, through 5 weeks of the season, Tennessee allows 0.42 points per possession defensively. That's number one in the country. That's really darn good. Let's put it that way. So
that's crazy.
I know that they've beat up on some bad teams. Kent State probably in that conversation with Temple as the worst team in the entire country. But you see the dominance from start to finish, and that's what good teams do. I like Tennessee to go on the road. And the thing with Tennessee I want to watch, young quarterback, don't let Arkansas muddy this game up the way that Mississippi State was a week ago against Texas, right? If they're able to walk in and play the game that they want to play, that's the sign that they're a true dominant road team and one that you should absolutely keep an eye on to make the playoff, to potentially win the SEC and make a run at a title.
I kind of agree with you. I think Arkansas is going to kind of try to muddy it up. And that's why I think Tennessee's going to win, but I think Arkansas is going to keep this game close. I think they will. Like I said, I think Sam Pittman's fighting for his job real hard right now. And that'll probably show a home game at night. Again, I think that crowd can go a little bonkers at night, as Texas fans know. So I think that's a good one. The other ones that I wanted to talk about, Bama goes to Vandy at 3:15. That's on the SEC network. Bama favored by 22.5 against a Vandy team that has played a lot of teams close, much closer than anticipated in some ways. Also, Ole Miss goes to South Carolina. South Carolina expected to get their quarterback back. That game happens at 2:30. Auburn, Georgia. That is a traditional rival. Not many people know about outside of that area of the country. But that game's at 2:30. But how much of a rivalry is that when you're favored by 23.5? Right? And it is at Georgia. I just don't expect Auburn to make much headway there or get much leeway from Georgia. Let's talk about Bama, Vandy, and Ole Miss, South Carolina. Let's start with Ole Miss, South Carolina, with South Carolina expected to get their quarterback back. Again, favored by 9, according to my bookie.
This is going to be the exact same game plan Kentucky put on paper a week ago for South Carolina. They're dominant. They're physical up front. They have enough playmaking ability to move the football with, obviously, Rocket Sanders is their running back now as well. He's questionable coming into this week, but should be able to be back on the playing field for South Carolina. Again, that dynamic run-pass ability by Lenore Sellers is going to make things difficult. And we've talked about it. Ole Miss spent all that time in the portal going out and revamping their trenches. I think their trenches kind of got whooped against Kentucky a little bit, at least shaken up. And that was their first real test. Now they go on the road to a place that's not easy to play at. Pretty high spread. I like what the Gamecocks can put on paper. And if they can, I mean, we watched them beat up on Kentucky, who just beat up on Ole Miss. If you go out there and kind of duplicate that same game plan, I think there's a recipe for success if you're the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Yeah, the matchup that I would worry about if I'm a South Carolina fan is their O-line going up against the Ole Miss defensive front. because they are very disruptive, like havoc-wreaking defensive front. And South Carolina's offensive line has been subpar so far this year. So that's the matchup to watch. But I'm with you. Lenore Sellers being back, that really kind of changes the complexion for South Carolina. I expect Ole Miss to bounce back. I'll give you a stat for Ole Miss. And I don't know if I haven't watched enough Ole Miss this year to really know like if this is part of their offensive identity. In that game they lost versus Kentucky, guys, they only had 5 design runs. 5 design run plays in the first half of the game.
Wow.
5 design run plays in the first half of the game. So I don't watch them enough to know if they're always like that or if that was just,
is that a Lane Kiffin / Steve Sarkisian throw to open up the run type of scenario?
Yes. I wonder, that's kind of my thing. So I don't know if that's just not a strength of theirs, but that was a big part where they deterred from doing it because they're so RPO heavy, and they basically Kentucky's defense messed with the RPO count in the box and manipulated them into always throwing. Like, I have no idea. But that's something to watch because, obviously we're talking about Ole Miss, South Carolina, but Kentucky, Texas will play. Sark runs an RPO-based passing game. He literally says my offense is an RPO-based passing game. And Lane Kiffin runs basically kind of an RPO-based passing game. If they were able to do that to Lane, could they do that to Sark, especially considering our running game or our deficiencies there in the run game? Anyway, but getting back to it, I think Ole Miss bounces back in this game, mostly because their defensive line can overwhelm the offensive line for South Carolina. That was my point.
So I'm with you, Rod. I think Ole Miss does bounce back in this game. I would say this about South Carolina and Kentucky, 2 very similar opponents, in my opinion, for Ole Miss. In one way, they both could get after the passer. South Carolina has 2 elite pass rushers.
Absolutely.
And so they're going to give Jackson Dart some issues too. We'll see what happens, but Ole Miss favored by 9. I don't know who's going to win the game necessarily. I definitely wouldn't be picking the over, or I'd stay away from the game completely, to be honest with you, if I were a gambler. All right, Bama Vandy for you guys. Again, Bama favored by 22.5. I find it interesting because I think that you saw what happened to Bama in the second half of that game. Mm-hmm. They can get bogged down on offense if things aren't firing on all cylinders. Kalen DeBoer does a great job of getting his teams out early, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. This is a very similar game to what you just talked about with Tennessee and Arkansas. Is Vanderbilt able to muddy up this game? That will be the determining factor. And can the Vanderbilt quarterback actually do anything against the Alabama defense? I'm going Bama here big. I actually think that they're probably still happy about their win against Georgia, clearly, and they may have some early issues, but they'll get going late and overwhelm Vandy. You guys, what are y'all thinking about this one?
I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
It feels like the ultimate trap game for Alabama. You're right. You come off the emotional big win that was, a blow up for a while, and then you had to get back reinvested, and it was an emotional finish, and everybody in the country's been talking about it was the best game of the season so far. You got a Heisman caliber quarterback. Your team's looking great. Everybody's looking at the 17-year-old wide receiver like he's the next greatest thing to come through college football, and he might be. He's that good. But Vanderbilt's kind of sneaky, and I think whenever you're an SEC team looking at Vanderbilt, you say, yeah, it's Vanderbilt. But as we've seen, they've taken Missouri to the wire. They're not necessarily that pushover team that we've seen in years past when watching the SEC from afar. I think Alabama still has enough talent to make this a game, at least towards the back half, that you look at it and it's probably a 20-point victory, similarly to what Texas and Mississippi State did a week ago, right? Yeah. By the end of it, you say, yeah, it wasn't a close game, but for a little bit of that, it was a 1-point game for most of that first half, and then it was only an 8-point game at halftime. I think you could see a sluggish start from Alabama against Vanderbilt, but at the end of the day, they just have too much talent, too many 5-star game changers on the field. It's not enough for me to think Vanderbilt's going to come in and win this game, despite the Diego Pavia magic that we've seen.
I would say this: the only thing that could make this interesting is if Jalen Milroe reverts and starts throwing the ball to the other team.
Yeah,
that's the only way this game gets close. You agree with that, Rod?
Yeah, I think you guys pretty much hit the nail on the head. I expect an emotional, I'd say emotional letdown, but I expect, there to be for Bama. It's such an emotionally exhausting game when you play one of those big games, top 5 matchups. I mean, I played a few of those, against Oklahoma. Those things, they just take it out of you. Whether you win or whether you lose, they take it out of you. And oftentimes, some of those next games, there's somewhat of a letdown, especially when you win those games because you put so much into it and there was so much build up toward it. And now it's like Vandy, and Vandy's kind of the Kansas, right, of the SEC. Kansas is no longer a pushover, but remember, it took us a while to process that. As the Big 12, it was like, whoa, no, you got to be ready for them Kansas games. And that's how Vanderbilt is now. They're on the come up, and it's like, no, it's still taking you a while to process. I think Bama's players still might be thinking it's a Vandy of old, and this Vanderbilt team may come with a little punch early. They don't have what it takes to withstand, 2 quarters to stay with Bama for more than 2 quarters, though. No.
Yeah, I would say this to Vanderbilt. CJ, you made a point to say that this could be a trap game. Texas goes to Vanderbilt the week after Texas plays Georgia. This could be something that is a precursor of sorts for Vanderbilt playing in these trap games, so to speak, at home, by the way. Alabama is going to Vandy. Texas is going to Vandy. We'll see what kind of parallels we can draw. Last game, and I'm just going to skip over this one kind of quickly. UCF versus Florida is the last SEC game of the day, 6:45 tonight on the SEC network. Central Florida, even though they just got blown out at home against Colorado, is still favored by 2.5 over Florida. Now, I will say this. If Florida wins this game, Florida is going to be a favorite when they play Florida State. Billy Napier is on the cusp right now of keeping his job.
Wow.
I'm just telling you. Now, he's lost 2 games already this year, but if he wins this one, he's going to go 2-1 in state, when prior to the season, some people thought he might go 0-3. Right?
Good point.
So he's on the cusp, even though UCF favored by 2.5. We'll talk about that at another time after the game, probably. Let's see what happens with the 2-headed quarterback system that UF has going on right now with Graham Mertz and DJ Lagway. All right, national games outside the SEC, folks. There's not that many that are interesting. We picked Michigan versus Washington simply because this is the game of defending national champion versus national champion runner-up. And 2 teams that are totally different this year, different head coaches, different quarterbacks, different personnel. Michigan, though, still ranked number 10 in the country, only 1 loss, that to Texas, of course. Washington's lost 2 games. They lost to Rutgers last week. But listen to this. Michigan goes to Washington. Washington is favored in this game by 2.5. Is that because Michigan can't complete the forward pass? I mean, that's a fair question, right? And I don't know. Washington literally favored by 2.5. The over and under in this game, this is one of those that kills you too. 41.5. They expect this to be 21-18.
They're fitting right in with the Big Ten, Bobby.
Oh, yes, they are. That's exactly.
I mean, that is. What do y'all think about these 2 programs and what's going on right now?
I'll just say this about Michigan. Texas made that defense look somewhat average or, mediocre. That defense is legit. That defense should keep them in every game this year. And I think that's kind of what they're going to build their blueprint on is the defense keeps us in games. Alex Orji, don't make the critical mistake because they can't afford. Their margin for error is really thin. It's really thin. I think that's probably what they're looking at too, because if they have a turnover, or let's just say if they just get behind, if they get behind double digits, more than 1 scored games, I mean that game might be pretty much over for Michigan. That's like they have that kind of margin for error. So I think that's what they're looking at. I'll take Washington, but Washington's offensive line worries me. They're not a great pass. They're not a great run blocking offensive line. They're an average pass blocking O-line going up against one of the better D-lines in the country. That's the matchup to watch. If Michigan wins and pulls the upset, it'll be because their O-line was exposed.
They just killed Will Rogers, the quarterback at Washington. Basically, they lost 3 guys to the NFL on the offensive line, and their center transferred to Alabama. CJ, what do you think?
Yeah, that Rutgers game for Washington a week ago was one of those games as a coach where you sit back and, you kind of reevaluate if this is what you want to continue doing with your life. Washington had 230 more yards of offense in that game. They went 2 of 12 on third downs. They went 2 of 4 on fourth downs. They missed 3 field goals. They lose by 3. That's a game they should win 9 times out of 10. The only game in which they lose that is the one that we saw last Friday night, obviously. So it's a tough spot to bounce back at home. You expect that offense to at least be able to move the ball more consistently, you would think, comparatively to what Michigan can do offensively. The key there is, can Michigan find any sort of passing attack? And if they do, I think they win that game pretty easily. If they can't, well, again, I think it might be one of those 1st to 14 or 1st to 17 games, Bobby. And for that reason, I like the game at home in Washington for the Huskies.
All right, good stuff. Hey, CJ and Rod, I'm looking at the other games this week. They're not real strong. SMU has a good team this year. They're going to Louisville. Louisville's still favored by 7. Pitt, North Carolina, Pittsburgh favored by 2.5. This could be Mac Brown's last year in Carolina if Pitt were to upset or were to beat North Carolina. Ohio State hosts Iowa. Iowa trying to shake loose of this non-offensive issue that they have, but they're not going to do it against Ohio State. Buckeyes favored there by 20. Clemson goes to Florida State. Florida State, I don't even know if that's a home field advantage anymore. They're moving on to their backup quarterback. And their backup quarterback last week, his stats, 0 for 4, sacked twice.
Dang.
That ain't going to work against Clemson, who's on a little bit of roll. The 2 other games I wanted to briefly touch on, and there's 2 different reasons for that. Miami, number 8 ranked Miami, goes to Cal. That game's at 9:30 West Coast time. Okay,
Ooh.
Miami. 9:30 West Coast. It's on ESPN. That is an ACC game. Their equipment truck had to leave on Tuesday to get there by Friday. Okay, they went 1,200 miles via a tweet. They had already gone 1,200 miles and driven 1,200 miles, and they weren't even halfway there.
Man,
that is just insane and stupid. And one of the reasons I don't understand conferences today, I expect Miami to roll, although Cal has played a couple teams close, and the late night game could always be a little janky on somebody. Last one, though, that I think is an interesting game and could have Big 12 implications. Texas Tech goes to Arizona, and yet another reason why I'm glad Texas is no longer in the Big 12. That game starts at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
10 p.m. On Fox, Texas Tech, Arizona. Arizona coming off a big win over Utah last week. Texas Tech, after getting beat by Washington State, has gone undefeated since. Zona favored by a touchdown here, according to my bookie. What do y'all think on Zona versus Texas Tech?
Oof. I mean, for every Texas Tech game, Bobby, it might be the 1st of 40. We talk about in the other sense of some Big Ten games where it's, the 1st of 14 wins that game. It might be the last to score, and it's going to be north of 40 for every Texas Tech game that we see for the rest of the time. For whatever reason, no matter who they play, whether it's SFA, Washington State, Arizona State a week ago, teams are scoring 45 and they're scoring 50, right? With the exception of Washington State, obviously. But for whatever reason, they're finding ways to win football games late with it being close. I think that travels in conference play against Arizona team that's not necessarily looked as, up to par as what we thought coming into the year, despite having one of the best quarterback to wide receiver combinations in the country. I think I'm riding the Tech wave. I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
Hey, Rod B, this is for you because Dwayne Aquina, your old mentor, is the defensive coordinator at Arizona. He's seen this type of offense all too often.
Yeah.
Is this Arizona defense built to stop the Tech passing attack?
Yeah, I mean, I think they know the strategy. That's for sure. Now, whether they're built for it, that's a different conversation altogether. I'll take Arizona in the matchup just because I'm kind of with CJ. I know you're picking Tech, but I don't know why Arizona's not better. because they have really good players. You look at the roster. There's some guys on that roster that are potential first-round picks on that roster right now on defense and on offense. I can't understand why they're not better, but we shall see. I mean, obviously the season, you still got a lot more of it to go. But I don't know. I'll take Arizona. I'll stick with I'll take Coach Keenan. It's a sentimental pick. I'm going Coach Keenan, baby.
All right, I'm going with Texas Tech. That's all. I think Tech's going to win straight up, even though that game is in Arizona, by the way. All right. Thanks again to our sponsor, MyBookie. Again, mybookie.ag. Make sure you give them a shout. Use code ONTexas for a first deposit match of up to 100%, up to $1,000. All right, guys, have fun watching football today. Jerry and I are going to be back a little bit later talking about surprises of 2024 for the football season for the Longhorns. Then we'll also have a recruiting update as well. Also, check us out on ontexasfootball.com. We have a game thread going up so everybody can follow along with us as well. For Rod and CJ, that's been this episode of the Saturday Conversation. Y'all have a good week. Hook 'em, or have a good weekend. Hook 'em.